Up, Greg.
Thanks, Justin. Thank you very much. So now I'd like to introduce Michael Tchong, who's our guest speaker tonight. We'll have Michael come on out, and I'll give a proper introduction. Michael, welcome.
Hello, guys. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. How are you?
This is your mic
Are we
here.
sitting right away?
I think we're going to try to sit. Shall we sit or stand?
After you. You're the
Okay,
host.
we'll have a sit.
We're so formal here.
So I'll give a brief background of Michael. We've known each other since the late 90s. Michael is the founder of 5 startups, including Macweek Magazine, which went on to be acquired by Ziff Davis Publishing, Cyber Atlas, which I think also went on to be acquired by, I believe, iPro, Iconicast, which I knew and was read by many in the marketing communications field, Uber Cool, and recently the Social Revolution, which we're going to talk about a little bit tonight, which is definitely a big idea. And it aims to reinvent America by crowdsourcing innovation, which is an extremely timely concept. He is also a futurist, a prolific speaker at events all over the world, and an author, Michael Tchong. Thank you.
Sounds very impressive.
So here's your
guess I
mic. We're
need to
gonna
speak
try to.
into
Yeah,
it,
you
huh?
might want to hold it just because we're recording for the video.
Okay.
So, true to startup grind form, Michael, we're gonna ask you a little bit about your background. Where you're from, and also kind of what first sparked your early sense of innovation and entrepreneurship, and kind of what got you started. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, first, I want to thank my mother who made this all possible. um, I was born in a small island in the Caribbean called Aruba. It's a Dutch island, and at least at the time I grew up, and it's now independent. So a banana republic that's in charge of itself, which is great. And I came to the United States after I saw what the country was like visiting here the first time. And I always wanted to be here. So I was, as I like to call myself, a rebel without a boss. And I convinced my parents to ship me off to New York to go to Fordham University. And so I was a small backwater boy in the big city. And I loved it. And eventually I heeded the call of Go West Young Man. And I found myself on the West Coast working for an ad agency in Palo Alto. And one thing led to the other. After advertising, I went into publishing. After publishing, I went into software. I was VP of marketing for one of the first companies to ship a desktop publishing program called Ready, Set, Go. And that led me to the idea of Macweek. And that led me to 4 more startups.
Well, great. So Michael, let me ask you. So you obviously worked in the ad agency business for some time, and you worked with a few very notable agencies, DDB and Chiat Day. Did that play a significant part in kind of where you went next? Did the agency business kind of give you a certain bedrock for that, or did you really want to get out in the startup world, or can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, well, you probably have heard of that travel book called Accidental Tourist. Well, that's kind of how I feel about my career. I lucked into advertising completely unplanned. I had no idea what I was going to do, and I thought it would be a cool summer job to have, but it lasted 3.5 years, at least the first agency. And that was an agency that later I discovered, because of course you're not totally cognizant about anything you do at any stage of your career. That's the only problem we have, right? I realized that Mr. Bill Bernbach, was a legendary advertising figure who came up with that whole advertising line for Volkswagen, Lemon. That was what the ad said, Lemon. so running counter to what people did, and that woke me up in retrospect as I studied how he was and what he did. That led me to my career, which, advertising, publishing, print, and it was print. The magazine was really state of the art then. I just want to put it in context.
So Michael, you decided to start Mac Week in the late '80s, right?
Right.
And it's kind of interesting. You're a little bit like me, where sometimes back in startup days you can almost literally remember the month and sometimes the week of the month when certain things
January
happen.
31st.
1987.
I
To my
was standing
point.
at the Hyatt Regency, and I had one of the, as Larry Maggot, who writes for the LA Times, will tell you, I was the first guy in publishing he ever met that had a cell phone. And it was one of these Panasonics, and it weighed like 5 pounds. It was a good heat sink. You didn't need no heat in your car. You just turned on the phone, and it would warm up the car for you. It's a huge heat sink. So I made a call from the Hyatt Regency on Embarcadero, and I called my friend over at, you won't believe this, the world capital of publishing, Titusville, Florida. See, no one, what's that? Titusville is right outside of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And he was working for a guy called Glenn Patch. Glenn Patch put out this fat catalog called Computer Shopper. And all Computer Shopper was the ultimate profitable engine. 100% advertising, no editorial. And I talked him into funding Mac Week.
And so this was a time back at when Stephen Jobs was already out of Apple.
Yes.
I think Scully was working there then as
He was
CEO.
running the show.
And so what was it like having a magazine back then covering so closely, Apple? And what are some of the things that perhaps you did back then to get your information that one would not be advised to do with Apple today?
Well, keep in mind, this is not the Apple that just became the world's most profitable company, okay? This was a radically different Apple. And they were not used to having a publication that covered them every week with that type of microscopic examination. So they were quite uncomfortable with our presence. And our presence was one that broke all the rules anyway, because one of the first lessons in startups is that you never have to be bashful for imitating success, okay? If there's a good Jaws, there's always going to be a great Jaws too. And I started this magazine because I had the seat of the pants conclusion, having seen a sneak preview of the Mac 2, due to my evangelists giving me, oh, well, look, it's a box, and it has a separate monitor, and it's color, and it was radically more cool than the old Mac 2, which at the time, or the Plus, actually. And so the Mac 2 led me to think. So I said, okay, what's the trend? What's the trend in your industry sector that is going to revolutionize this future of ours? And I had been in publishing, and I had been in advertising, and I had been in printing, because Manhattan Graphics was the company that made Ready, Set, Go. It was really a dusty old typesetting company on Varick Street in New York. So far removed from Silicon Valley, you can't even imagine it. And so I learned that, look, I said, the Mac is going to become the ultimate desktop publishing tool. That's going to revolutionize the advertising agency business. That's going to revolutionize the publishing business. That's going to revolutionize the design business, which are all now ruled by the Mac. So I decided that it needed a organized volume buying magazine, so that large institutions like General Electric in Stamford, Connecticut, or University of Rhode Island, or Maine, or all the universities that had massive installations, Radcliffe, people like that, that needed organized buying info. So I started a magazine. Unbeknownst to me, Dave Bennell, who was running Macworld magazine, had done a deal with Apple to be the designated weekly. And so when I announced, we walked into Apple, and the first meeting was with Barbara Krause, who was their VP of PR. And she looks us in the face. You know, you could tell, you could feel the icicles falling off her face, you know, as she looked at us and tried to figure out who the hell we were, you know. And how did we have the temerity to come in and start a weekly publication when there was a designated other weekly publication that had all of Apple's support? So I broke all the rules, you know. In fact, when we launched, Apple sent a letter out to all our advertisers to say, if you advertise in what that was, they had to call themselves Macintosh Today because they thought that Apple had registered Macweek and Macweek and IDG, I'm sorry, and Apple thought that IDG had taken care of it because they were in the publishing business. Neither of them had taken care of it. They both had screwed up, so I stole it. I stole it right under the nose of Apple and IDG. So as you can imagine, it's not fun to start up when the mothership does not like you. It was a tough battle.
So you ran the magazine, you built it up, and you sold it to Ziff Davis Publishing, right? Which is a big, large publisher that's been around since the 1920s, and you went on to stay there and run it as publisher for almost 4 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how was that experience? A lot of companies sell and join a larger one, and it really changes the culture. It's not fun, but it must have been a fairly positive experience.
Most entrepreneurs leave within a couple of years of any buyout, as you well know, because they consider their job done and they want to go do something else and they've got money to do it. I stayed for 4 years, and I worked within the Ziff Davis behemoth, which was a very successful company. Remember, Bill had already sold the company once before for $1 billion. He had sold skiing, stereo review, brides magazine, flying, diving, all of the vertical segment books. But he had held on to the computer mags. And that is how Macweek came to be. We were part of the Mac User was the other one. They were in Foster City, and we were here on Howard Street in San Francisco. And Bill was a billionaire once over, and was about to become a billionaire second time over, because remember, he then sold Comdex, and he sold another slew of magazines for another $1.5 billion. So what do you learn from a very successful billionaire who has the world's largest pre-Columbian art collection in his apartment in New York? He taught everyone about sales structure, and this is something that I think you should all, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you should really take heed. The sales structure was a story. He always had his salespeople tell a story. Instead of you walking in and saying, "Hey, David Blumberg, I know you're a successful venture capitalist. I have the hottest idea. Give me $2 million." You tell him a story. You start with the market. And you talk about the buyers, and then you talk about the competition, and then you summarize it, because you got to remember. It's the old Steve Jobs trick, right? I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you again what I just told you. So that was the structure, and the structure was extremely successful because he sold 2 companies that had propelled themselves on really largely the merit of sales, of course, coupled with excellent product. He always said, serve your reader. It's all about the reader. It's not about the advertiser. So those 2 things taught me a lot, and I stuck around and I learned it. And, if you want me to recite it later for you, or I can say it to you now: opening, market, buyers, competition, summary, your product, close, ask for the order. So that's the structure. And I think it's really good because what it does is it is designed to seek objections before you come to your product description, because you need to flush them out first. Objection handling needs to happen early on because if you get disagreement when you're describing your product, then that person did not understand what the market setup is. So that's what I learned in my 4 years.
So, Michael, I'm curious. You sold Macweek to Ziff.
Yes.
You sold another one of your companies to to iPro. You sold the third one to Imagine Media, which is owned by Chris Anderson, who owns TED Worldwide and a lot of things. Was it your goal to sell these? You obviously have a knack for it. It's nice to have an exit strategy. Is that something that you had kind of thought about, or just each of those situations it worked out that way and it happened? And
I mean, Glenn Patch ran the company, so it was ultimately his decision to be acquired by Ziff.
Yeah.
The rumored purchase price was $80 million. You know, I don't know what the share of MacWeek was, but I'm sure it was substantial. But Computer Shopper was the biggest animal there in terms of advertising. So both of them went to Ziff. iPro happened within 4 months of me starting the site. And they needed my expertise. They wanted to get into publishing. I was the first market research firm about the internet. It was generic. It was statistics, websites, servers, all that stuff. And they wanted that expertise, so they bought the company. Yeah. And I joined iPro. And then in terms of Chris, you and I just had lunch and we strategized. And he said, I need help because you know all the ad agency people. I need help with Business 2.0, which was the magazine. He was negotiating with Time to buy it for $200 million, and then he decided that because Fast Company sold for $400 million, these were the dot-com boom days. He decided he could do better, and in the end, he had to sell it for 80. Mm-hmm. He couldn't do better, but that's a fairly nice exit strategy. So they were very busy. The magazine, as you well know, I don't know if you remember, but both the industry standard was like this, and they were like that, and between the two of them, they had so much advertising that Iconicast spun out after a year, which was another interesting experience where, you get bought and then you leave with a stock plan and an investment. And then, you basically try to, you're on your own. I took one employee with me, and I built it up into a 14-person company that had Dennis Rodman drive out on a Harley-Davidson motorcycle.
Which is always great. So let's go a little bit more current for a few minutes. You about a year ago, I think I went to a book signing of yours. You have a new book out called Social Engagement Marketing. Mm-hmm. You're doing speaking engagements, all over the world. Can you talk a little bit about your book, and then also about your experience speaking? When I called you to do this event, you were, I think, just on your way down to Colombia, where you were speaking to an organization, 400 some folks, and in Colombia. And
that was the Interactive Advertising Bureau, so that came back from our days. Dave actually, made my career. It was his company, Ad Auction, that hired me for 6 gigs. And that put me all over the territory in America. And people saw me speak, and they liked what they saw. And that's how I get most of my speaking gigs. It's all word of mouth. People see me speak, and they say, I want you to speak. Today I spoke at Reed Smith, which are a big law firm downtown. And I have standing invitations to go to Peru and Chile to speak to students about the very thing that, I'll explain a little bit more what I'm trying to do next. But essentially the job is... okay, let me back. Iconicast was very successful, but the spun out was, didn't work out because we got caught in the dot-com downdraft. And it was my first startup that went south. And I've never ever had that before. I had to lay 14 people off, which is the most painful thing an entrepreneur can ever do. Avoid it at all cost. I love what was it the Instagram guy did? He immediately rehired all the people he fired, and so they're all profit too. It was hard to do. So I was on the street, and I had to shutter my 50,000 subscriber circulation publication because all my advertisers had gone. They were all dependent on .com revenue, and the .com market had dried up effectively. So I had to reinvent myself. And that led to my first stage, which is, you got to find yourself. You don't know what you do. And I'm having drinks in Oakland at that jazz club, Yoshi's, and I'm at a party. And a woman asks me, what do I do? And, I had just come out of Iconicast and 6 years of writing a weekly newsletter, almost largely by myself, 8 pages long, I decided I didn't really want to explain it. So I said, I analyze trends on the internet. And she looked at me, she said, oh, you're a Fate Popcorn of the internet. Fate Popcorn is a very famous first trend forecaster, lives in New York, big firm, very well known among all her corporate clients. And I looked at her and I said, crack, I have been doing this the whole time. I didn't even know it. So I raced home, I fired up Google, and I put in trends, trendsetter, trend watching, all the trends, and I looked at the keywords, and I realized that there was nobody that had any brand whatsoever. Not Fate Popcorn, nobody. Okay, so I decided I'm going to become a trend watcher. And that fit in perfectly, because then you know how you back into a situation where you do, you know, the first thing first, and then you realize why you did it, is that the dot-com failures that we had were largely due to the fact of the matter that in 2001, 40 million people did not buy pet food online. And these huge missed opportunities are all turning out to be correct. Now everyone watches video. Now everybody's shopping online. Amazon is going to, you know, Amazon is leading to the Amazonification of our suburbs, where our suburbs are going to just turn into massive gray fields, all these empty stores, because Amazon will drive just about everybody out of business. And so I'm here to show you the future, not to scare you, but to prepare you and to make you understand it better so that you can embrace it instead of rejecting it. And that's my job. My job is to kind of like help you see the future. And it kind of like led me into this whole speaking gig, which I do everywhere now. And it's all about, now of late, being a cheerleader. I'm a cheerleader for the future. I really believe that we have massive amounts of opportunity. I think we're leaving huge billions, if not trillions, on the table by being inactive. And that's led me to my 5th startup.
Which gets us to your point, to the social revolution, which you explained to me a few months ago. I think it's very interesting. It is a big idea. This is not one of these small kind of derivatives of something else. This is a big idea and a big concept, and I'd love for you to talk about that just a little bit and kind of your vision behind that and how you see that.
I know you know the entrepreneuring rule. You can try to sell like Groupon does, the small guy on the corner that runs the beauty store. Or you could try to sell Johnson & Johnson. And the effort is probably about the same. So when you say it's a big idea, I don't think it's a big idea at all. I think it's just an idea. And I'm going to try to execute it the way I would see you execute it as a business person. So after the Lehman Brothers fiasco in 2007, and I was doing 45 gigs that year in speaking a year, and I was just like looking at all the audiences, and I could tell as of September, everyone's spirit had gone down and tanked. And the more I thought about it, I realized I'm not a trend watcher. I'm someone who is there to pump you up. I'm there to, so my presentation starts to reflect it. The title of my presentation then was, I'm going to tweet you up, which kind of told you what I was about. I was about Twitter, and I was about spiritually lifting you up. And I think that tomorrow I speak at the USF Hospitality Symposium on Fairmont, and it's to the hoteliers and it's to the restaurateurs. And I can tell them, till I'm blue in the face, get a Facebook page, make sure you are viral, make sure you have engagement, make sure you do this, make sure you do that, landing page is this, design that, this, that. But the reality is when you look at their faces, you realize the core market is sick. America is sick. So no matter how much marketing you do, if we can't get Americans back to work, this ain't going to work. So that led to after many years of thinking about the idea, to my 5th startup, which is Social Revolution. And the idea here is we're going to do it just like you would. You don't run a business without a business plan, right? So we're going to write a business plan for America. And we're going to delineate all the goals, and we're going to make all the steps very manageable. So think about the problem, because it sounds complex. Just think about it like the alcoholics do. You take every day, one day at a time. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So first of all, we're going to launch a crowdsourcing engine run by Spigot, which is out of Pleasanton, California, $30 million startup. That ideation engine will allow people who come to the site and look at the most popular solutions we have for healthcare, for education, for politics, for government, for business, for finance, and then vote on the best solutions that are being proffered by people from all over the world. And what's your benefit? Well, we're going to do it the good old American way. We're going to pay you for it. And the way we pay you is we're going to make a video game out of it. There's going to be a leaderboard. And depending on how many times you comment and how many times you submit ideas and how many friends you introduce to the community and whatever, you get points. Remember green cards? No, no one does remember green. But in the olden days, there used to be these S&H green stamp things. And then when you went to the gas station, they would stamp your card. And after a lot of stamps, you could get a toaster oven. So we're going to do the same thing, but the toaster oven of today, of course, is the iPad and the iPhone 5 and all of those things that people now want, but then perhaps even more esoterically, how about lunch with Fareed Zakaria from CNN? Someone who's really trying to push the agenda. He's got CEOs coming to his TV show, and he's trying to get them to say, what do we need to do to get America out of this rut? He's one of these positive thinkers. So we're gonna try to get Americans to feel a little peer pressure, beat that apathy, get engaged, and believe, above all, that it's possible. That's the biggest challenge, because most people think it's not possible. And I'm firmly of the, oh yes, it's possible. You bet it's possible. Just need to have concrete goals and deliverables, and I need dates. Give me dates. When can we have it? First date, 2020, presidential elections, online. That's the first date. You're going to say, oh, okay, Michael, that's not possible. Just crowdsourcing. It's the hottest thing since sliced bread. A Canadian company called Pebble raised $4.5 million for a watch that all venture capitalists turned down. Yeah. They have already raised $119 million just last year for startups. $119 million. You can see the writing is on the wall. And I'm going to leverage both those trends, crowdsourcing to organize the information and get it out there and make people understand what the choices are and how the solutions can be very beneficial to them. And then also use that crowdfunding to help a lot of startups that we're going to try to help. You need guidance. A lot of people need guidance. So I use the trends to say, what do we need funding in America? Number one, robotics. Number two, internet security. Number three, obviously, electronic healthcare records and all the things that go with it. Number four, smart ID card systems. Number five, just go down the list and then say to the VCs, like, Dave Blumberg, hey, Dave, here's what I'd like you to look at. When your portfolio companies come in, prioritize it in this order, please, because this is my impetus. This is what I'm going to ask you for. I'm going to ask you to invest $20 billion every year. Now, I want you to keep in mind, every time I get a call from that guy from the Contra Costa Times who asks me, hey, Michael, VC investment is up to $25 billion. That's a 3% growth over last year. I say, who the hell cares, George? It was $102 billion in 2000. Don't tell me that 12 years later, we're at a quarter where we were when the money supply was 1/4 the size. It's not right. We need to get people, and then, the VCs need to understand, hey, look, you're responsible for 2/3 of America's innovation. Please go out and invest in companies. And come back to the table and tell me that 45 trillion in cash that's floating around the world can be invested in America to the tune of $100 billion a year. That's a drop in the frickin' bucket. So we need direction, and that's what Social Revolution outline it, business plan it. Here's where the growth is going to come from. Here's how much we can save. Do you know that the savings, we can get that budget down and improve your services? Because there's so much waste. The GSA parties in Las Vegas are minimal, okay? Minimal. The head of the Smithsonian Museum has made 117 trips in the past 5 years to places like France, and just massive. There's no accountability. Got to run it like a business. The next time you go to the DMV, you walk up, you get processed, you'll immediately get an email that says, "How was the service today?" Does that sound familiar? That's what we need. How was the service today? Did we help you quickly? Was everything taken care of to your satisfaction? Wouldn't it be fun when you walk out of the DMV and someone says, "Hey, did you find everything you wanted for today?" Yeah.
Well, so Michael, as I said, I think it's a fascinating and a big idea and an important one. Kind of in closing, after your 25 years working in the startup community, and for this group here, for me, are there any just kind of like last minute points or observations or suggestions that you would have for those of us crazy and nutty enough to stay in this business?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just kind of any final reflection like to hear.
You know as well as I do that our industries are in massive amounts of change and upheaval. So just think about, there's no real. When I say you trend watch, you're basically looking at historical data and try to project what it's going to look like in the future. So you need to look at some of the things that are happening today. Apple has sold 67 million iPads. 67. Nothing has sold that fast in history. So the whole computer industry is in massive change. And the phone is the same thing. 218 million iPhones. 258 million iPhones sold. The numbers is simply staggering. So there's a change going on. What we need is more cloud synced apps, everything seamless. What we need is better GUIs. We need GUI shops. I'm going to encourage the venture capitalists to invest a couple of $2 to $3 billion a year in 3,000 GUI studios, because our human user interface is going to leap forward. Siri, tip of the iceberg. Everything will be voice driven, or everything will be driven by your eyeball movements. Whatever the interface is at the time, we need people who can write the software to do it. We need far more significantly cheaper web-based software. It is absolutely ridiculous today that I still use tools whose metaphors were designed in the 70s. We're talking Excel and Word. That were designed when there was no internet, no web, no social media friend requests, that are, all that crap. Nothing ever should last that long in our technology industry. It's time to jump in and start thinking about what is the promise of the internet. What is the promise of the internet? That the CEO can press one button and launch a CRM campaign to the top 20% of his best customers. And until that's possible, without you having to get the IT department involved and it costing you $250,000 in software to Oracle, that's the opportunity, and there's a ton like it. Take a look at all. You don't have to be no trend watcher. What is a pain in the ass? Come up with a solution. What is a pain in the ass? You run a business? Okay, you're going to have a whole bunch of business cards tonight, right? How do you get that database? How do you remember who said what to you and what asked for what? How do you send follow-up emails? How do you, all of that stuff is retarded.
Well, that sounds like a nice conclusion there. That's that was great, Michael. So
I'm sorry about that.
No, that was.
I'll take it back.
No,
Mentally
that was great.
challenged.
No,
It's mentally challenged.
No, that's great. So maybe we could open it up to answer those to the audience.
Yeah, I have a question. Michael, and maybe you could just repeat it
I
again.
will.
When you're going against Apple and they that you said that you had that conversation where you went into the mothership and basically said, hey, we've already got somebody to work with. How did you at that point decide that? Like, what was your motivation to say, hey, we're not going to give up to this point because that's a massive roadblock. But what was the motivation for you guys to say, we're not going to listen to conventional wisdom, listen to Apple, we're going to power through this and make it successful?
It was guerrilla warfare. I mean, I have a Facebook friend. His name is John Zeisler. John used to work at Apple. He was the product manager for, I think, FileMaker or something like that. And he sent the email around that said, if you advertise in Macintosh today, Apple will give you a 25% discount. How do you compete against that? How do you compete? That's impossible. And the funny part is, of course, they imitated us to a T. We started with 50,000 subscribers. We charged $6,000 an ad page. They did exactly the same thing. So I decided to sandbag them, guerrilla warfare. I called up a few of my agency buddies. I said, hey, what would happen if I suddenly drop my rates to $3,000? And he says, that's like dropping your pants. All the ad agencies will immediately stop doing business with you because that means you're in a panic. And you can't do that. That's a no-no. You have no credibility. You said 50,000, now you're going to 30,000. You're lying sometime. Was it at the beginning, at the end? So I did it. I just lowered it. So you're a little Mac developer, and in comes Rep A who says 50,000, $6,000, and then in comes Rep B who says 30,000, $3,000. What do you buy? It was a classic marketing sandbagging by price. And so, of course, they started to deal off the rate card. And I actually have a Xerox of the Ogilvy and Mather letter that was some of my friendly competition decided, or my friendly friends in the field decided to give me. And in that it said, you know, Microsoft will get a page in Macintosh today for $3,000, which is effectively my rate. So they were able to, you know, they dropped their pants. But, you know, they underestimated me. They thought that since, hey, what does he know about publishing? We're going to beat the crap out of him, you know? But I decided, hey, you know, I bought immediate credibility by buying the best newsletter team, Rick LePage and Rick Ford out of Massachusetts. That gave me that editorial credibility that I instantly had. And they were the John Grubers of today. If you know the Mac market today, John Gruber is the Rick Page and Rick Ford. So I bought the credibility. I did incredibly creative marketing. The Apple code name for the Mac 2 was Chablis, I believe, and the other one was another wine. And so what I did is I figured out how to FedEx alcohol in 1987. That's what's called trendsetting. I FedExed it, and some people said they got it at their Seder. The wine suddenly came at they loved it. The developers loved it. It was the most talked about campaign in the Macintosh developer community. So marketing, sandbagging on price, and then just delivering the product. You got to deliver the product.
That's great. Anybody else have a question? Let's go back here in the corner.
Yeah, I got a question about the social revolution. I love the intention, and I wonder, you're putting out all these ideas on how to better things like healthcare, and then you ask people to vote on it. I see that it's kind of like on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire when you ask the crowd, and the crowd does real well on answering the title of a Dr. Seuss book, but not so well on technical questions like what's a good solution to healthcare.
No. That's very important. So here's the idea. There are about 175 million people in, say, Facebook, and another 40 million Americans on Twitter. So what we're going to do is we're going to use social media to flush out all vertical market specialists in each respective vertical. So the healthcare have healthcare professionals, and then educational professionals in education, and people in business and finance. The four core markets, of course, are the drivers. They're also the ones that are, screwing us up mightily right now. So those four core areas I focused on. I've left other areas out. We can't focus on everything right away. We can't deal with infrastructure. We can't deal with environment. We got to fix the country first. In those areas, if I can get 30, remember, SOPA was defeated by a mere 67,000 people on Facebook. Just keeping that in mind. So if I can get 20 to 30,000 people per sector to vote at the high-end level, so they're the ones that do the selection of the better electronic health record system. They do a pre-screen, if I want to call it that way. And then once that pre-screen is finished, then we submit it to the voters at large, so that it doesn't have to be, to your point, voted on by the comic book crowd. So that will help a lot, because that way it's vetted. And also that helps also because one of the biggest arguments we have right now on television is, of course, as you well know, one party will point to one and say, no, this is the correct set of statistics, and the other one say, no, this is the correct set of statistics. You're going to have one set of verified statistics. Think about it as the what are those guys called in the automotive field? The J.D. Powell of government trending data.
And when you folded solved a quaternary structure of a protein in HIV research that confounded scientists for 10 years, and they did it in 3 weeks by gamification.
Yeah,
So
really?
Sourcing is possible for solutions in medicine, both at bench research level and probably at higher levels.
And by the way, just to your point, also there are a huge number of people who have already proffered solutions in all categories. So we can start off with some pretty nifty, easy ones to handle, like electronic health records can save $35 billion, according to the experts.
Eliminating the penny can save.
That's the one I wrote about. If you go to Social Revolution, you'll love it. It's $1 billion in consumer processing time. It's $200 million for the banks, and it costs $190 million to produce at a loss, because, as you well know, the penny's worthless. Who needs it? Round up, round down. Get rid of the damn thing. I just tweeted a pic that I found outside of the Hyatt downtown. A whole bunch of pennies right at the parking meter. Somebody said, I can't deal with these crap. They're worth nothing for the meter. And he threw them all down, or she threw them all down. And I took a pic, I put it up on Path, because I said, look, who needs this crap? And it's an environmental hazard. So, yeah, get rid of all that stuff. So all of these things are there. We already know. Flat tax, value-added tax. You're going to hate it, but you got to do it, because unfortunately, this is the other thing that politicians don't tell you. We're going to do some belt tightening. It's got to happen. And that belt tightening is going to sometimes require more of a payment, but also keep in mind your overall tax rate is going to come way down. So in effect, it's probably going to be a wash for most people.
So let's see, back here in the blue shirt.
I had a question about that your premise is that people are going to do these, they're going to fill out these questionnaires because they're going to get a badge of some sort, and that's going to make them feel good because they've got they have certain status.
Yes.
Proper?
Yeah.
And I'm in the middle of designing something. It's a design website and blog that I'm changing not only the blog structure that the content lands into, but what's around it. So in doing that, I don't want any advertising.
No,
I can't do
and you
advertising.
shouldn't.
It's a
And you
very
shouldn't.
artistic piece.
Yeah.
So
No flash, all HTML.
Right.
Okay.
Right, no flash.
Yeah.
And so people can actually move things on this desk, and they can learn about design. So what I'm having a difficult time with is how to find out how it's going to fund itself over time. I have some ideas, and it doesn't have to make a ton of money. But if it becomes popular, I want to know from the start, from the get-go, how is this going to?
Are you talking about advertising?
I don't want to advertise.
Why not? Don't you want money?
Because I don't want anything landing on that page. I want it to be strictly artistic. And from my standpoint, and I think a lot of other artists and designers that are not necessarily.
Why can't you display an ad
web
between sections of the website?
You mean
why
like
can't you-
land somewhere on an ad?
Why can't you have a full screen ad when you go to a section?
Because you don't go off the page.
No, I know, but what happens if you had the resources section or the FAQ or whatever, all these things that you have on your
I thought
website?
about the fact that you could have resources that would, if you're directing somebody to a resource, then you can collect points on whatever it is that they're buying.
Mm-hmm.
But the premise of the entire premise of the entire site is to not be depending on having to buy things.
Right.
To be innovative from the ground up. So I really don't want to have a lot of sourcing like
Yeah.
house, where you go onto the page and you see
Yeah.
all the little tags, what it
Right.
even costs.
Right,
To me,
right.
that's a violation.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, even the $100 billion debuting IPO next month has a very debatable advertising revenue model.
Well, I just thought it was curious.
So
that you
if
said-
they can figure it out with 8,000 employees in that brand new headquarters of theirs, what are your chances? Keep it simple.
But I like the idea
Keep
of
it
you're-
simple.
You're grabbing people and giving them something that you think psychologically they know, and I know
Save
Lyle
time.
Lithium does
Okay,
the same
time.
thing. It's basically
You need to see a presentation of mine where you can look at all the Uber trends and stuff like that. But the Uber trend is time compression, the acceleration of life. We're too damn busy. TBD, too busy disorder, energy drinks, coffee, pumping up, no enough sleep, etc., etc.
So how are you
Multitasking.
gonna take the time to fill out a question?
You need to save time. Make sure that that site visitor understands it's all about saving time, and time is more valuable than money.
When you're discovering things
then
on the site, you're talking
exactly. So when you're learning, so now what can you sell to your visitor that helps them save even more time? And that's the value, and that is the value in the future. So that could be
Or if you find that really what we're doing is we're so design deprived in this culture right now, and we can go into a major store like Restoration Hardware and buy one color. Hello, I mean, it's come down to a really saturated market of people doing the same thing again and again and
It's
again.
called
I'm not
fashion.
saying- Well, no, it used to be you could go to Sears and get anything in any color, okay? No, come on.
well, that's the subject of another
So
time.
basically, you're talking time, and I'm also saying that there is something that's lacking, and because it's lacking, then people need that richness.
Yeah.
So I see what you're saying in the time factor, but also it's about finding out really interesting resource.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Gentleman's been very patient here in the front.
Let's try to end
Mark.
I'll try to end it with note, yeah. So historically, the discussion was closed architecture loses to open architecture.
Yes.
Sony had a better product, but it lost the Betamax to VHS.
Right.
Along comes Apple. Seems like it's losing to Microsoft all along the way, doing hardware, software, and then a resurgence. What do you explain that opposite trend?
It only needs to be open if it sucks. Because then you don't need everyone's help to improve it. Apple does not need improvement. So it came up with one button. It's going to be $1 trillion company, the first $1 trillion company. And I tell everybody in Silicon Valley, and by the way, if I need to start reinventing America, the first place to stop, Silicon Valley. We need a giant enema, okay? We need to get rid of all this whole complexity. We need to look at the fact that why is Google the second most valued company, and Apple the #1 valued company? What is the running theme here? Simplicity. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. So, remember what I told you about the one-button CRM? Who's going to develop it? And I'll help you fund it. Let's crowdfund this one right away. Drag and
All right.
drop.
Thank you very much, and thank everyone for coming out tonight, and we appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.